Good afternoon. My name is Ella George and I'm the Chair of the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee. I declare open this public hearing of the Legislative Assembly's Legal and Social Issues Committee inquiry into the recruitment methods and impacts of cults and organised fringe groups. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues who are participating today. Jackson Taylor, the member for Bayswater. Christine Cousins, the member for Geelong, Rachel Westaway, the member for Prahran, Cindy McLeish, the member for Eildon, and John Lister, the member for Werribee. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the witnesses who've engaged with our inquiry today and across other public hearing dates, and particularly the individuals and families who've bravely shared their personal experiences with coercive high control groups. This afternoon, the committee is hearing from Anke Richter, Director of Decult. I thank Anke for her time and interest in participating in this important inquiry. All evidence given today is being recorded by Hansard and broadcast live. While all evidence taken by the committee is protected by parliamentary privilege in Victoria, comments repeated outside this hearing may not be protected by this privilege. We will now commence the public hearing, and I welcome Anke and I invite you to make a brief opening statement. This will be followed by questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to contribute to this groundbreaking inquiry and for allowing me to join you today from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's an honour to speak here, and you might become global leaders in human rights reform. The information I share comes from over a decade investigating cults as a journalist for my book Cult Trip, from running the non-profit organisation Decult for the last 2 years, and from my own participation in neo-tantra groups, spiritual festivals, and so-called large group awareness trainings, or LGATs. My goal is to highlight the lasting harm that cults have caused that are not religious, particularly to women and children. The booming wellness and self-help industry is a largely unregulated multi-million-dollar market, from yoga, meditation, or coaching to alternative health treatments. While these can be beneficial and many of those businesses are benign, some are shop fronts for cults. Tragedies and even death have happened where people were looking for healing and personal growth. Among the many problematic organizations active in Victoria, I want to draw your attention to ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. It originated in the US from an alleged spiritual brothel that was raided by police in 2011. ISTA is the main commercial player in Australia's Tantra scene, and it now faces mounting allegations of serious harm that include sexual assault, psychotic breaks, and lasting emotional damage. These have been reported by New York Magazine, Radio New Zealand, Bali News, and the Israeli Center for Cult Victims, among others. Now, ISTA's presence in Victoria began in 2009 with the first Australasia Conference of Sexuality and Consciousness in Melbourne. This event introduced ISTA to the region and was followed by a series of annual conferences and training retreats. So since then, between 1,000 and 1,500 people have attended over 30 ISTA trainings across Australia that cost around 3,000 Australian dollars. ISTA combines neo-tantric practices, shamanism, psychodrama, and erotic rituals in a seductive, intoxicating format that promises rapid transformation, sexual liberation, and emotional healing. The courses are deliberately secretive and hyper-intense, with little sleep or privacy, to push participants out of their comfort zone and into group conformity. This can break down their critical thinking and consent boundaries, and that's where harm can happen. Students sign broad waivers that effectively place all duty of care on themselves. I can provide more detailed information about ISTA's expansion in Australia, its courses, facilitators, business structure, and 50+ international reports of harm. For now, let me highlight their recruitment. ISTA conferences have served as feeders for costly core trainings. Some week-long retreats were scheduled immediately after a festival or conference, which meant that the inspired attendees could transition seamlessly into the intensive. These funnels are intentional, and I was drawn in this way myself. In 2012, long before allegations had surfaced, I attended ISTA's Sex and Consciousness conference in Byron Bay. It has since become the independent Taste of Love Festival, still with a heavy ISTA presence. The ecstatic weekend was my gateway drug. The following year, I did the week-long level 1 training in the Yarra Valley outside Melbourne, then other trainings in New Zealand, the UK and Australia. I also assisted at events. So although I was never violated, I left after 6 years because of the overt harem culture of the leaders, their manipulation and sex with their students, the harboring of predators, and the lack of accountability or trauma-informed care. And since I published my book, Cult Trip, in 2022, I have been targeted by ISTA through online attacks and legal interference with my work. So ironically, my first cult investigation began at the same time, after decades of other journalism, began at the same time as my descent into ISTA, which is living proof that anyone can be drawn into a cultic group, even a cult journalist. Back then, Alan and Unwin commissioned me to write a book about Centrepoint, a former sex and therapy cult north of Auckland that had emerged from the human potential movement. The recruitment happened through counseling and encounter weekends that were endorsed by social services. Centrepoint was started by middle-class educated people, lawyers, teachers, nurses, psychiatrists, around a leader who was a self-proclaimed therapist. It ran for about 20 years before court action shut it down in 2000. Centrepoint was New Zealand's largest intentional community and its most devastating. In the 1980s, police raided the commune twice. The leader and over a dozen people were jailed for the sexual abuse of children and for manufacturing psychedelic drugs that were taken in group sessions with teenagers as young as 12. A Massey University study later found that 1 in 3 children at Centrepoint suffered sexual abuse, and the true number is likely higher. As a journalist, I wanted to explore the psychological aftermath of this human experiment to understand how a utopian dream turned into a collective nightmare and how ordinary people ended up as convicted pedophiles. I tracked down dozens of former Centrepoint members and their adult children, also in Australia, where one of the main perpetrators had moved with his family to start another free love commune. What I found out over the course of my research was far worse than I had foreseen. Some victims had never shared their story before and still haven't recovered 30 years later. They became drug addicts or sex workers, tried to commit suicide, couldn't hold a job or relationship, or had too much fear to even visit the suburb where Centrepoint once was. So after 2 years of interactions with victims, bystanders, and abusers, sometimes all in the same family, I developed PTSD from vicarious trauma. I mention this today because Centrepoint, though shocking, was not unique. The same coercive patterns that enable sexual abuse exist in religious and secular cults alike that are active today. I've reported about some of them. Gloriavale, a fundamentalist Christian community in New Zealand that was started by an evangelical preacher from Australia and has been in the courts for slave labor, fraud, and sexual assault. Agama, an esoteric Tantra yoga school in Thailand where over 30 women reported sexual violation, and many students, as well as a rape victim, were from Melbourne. The Rajneesh movement around Indian pop guru Bhagwan or Osho, which had a significant presence in Australia in the 1980s. Its remaining base is now in Byron Bay, with smaller urban centres in Sydney and Melbourne. And One Taste, the American business behind Om or orgasmic meditation. Melbourne became one of their hubs with 1,000 local members attending recruiting meetups called Turn On. After an FBI investigation in 2018, their founder was convicted this year on forced labor conspiracy charges. So in all these different cults I came across, the main issue was never their belief system, nor was it the strange rituals, relationship styles, aggressive sales tactics, or the uniform look. The harm comes from coercive control and systemic abuse, which goes unchecked. So some insights from my research, and mind you, I'm not an expert, just a journalist. Sexuality, like other basic human needs, becomes a tool of control and manipulation, whether it is amplified when you get pressured or rewarded to be promiscuous, or it is suppressed by purity culture, celibacy, homophobia, and strict gender segregation. Sex with a leader is often reframed as healing or spiritual growth. Early sexualization and statutory rape was also common in Russianish or Osho communities around the world, enabled by the same ideology as in Centerpoint, with the same disastrous consequences, but without any justice for the victims. And by the time they wanted to lay charges, the statute of limitation had usually passed. Centerpoint, as well as other groups of the same ilk, had a brutal internal hierarchy of public ranking, shaming, or degrading. It broke people and enabled the sexual abuse. In these hypersexualized predatory environments, 13-year-old girls were seen as adults. Some survived or gained status by sleeping with adults, while others tried to make themselves undesirable by putting on weight or not washing anymore. Child sexual abuse survivors who spoke out later were usually dismissed by older members or even their peers, told that their experience was karmic, an opportunity for learning, that they attracted this or were stuck in victim consciousness. In modern groups like ISTA, this victim-blaming mindset prevails as radical self-responsibility. Toxic New Age ideology prevents victims from identifying as such. Coercive tactics, post-abuse, keep them silent. For survivors, recovery is long and difficult. Many distrust therapy after being harmed in pseudo-therapeutic settings or were taught to fear health professionals. Those who do seek counseling often encounter practitioners unfamiliar with cultic trauma. In worst cases, these clients who I've met are re-traumatized by inappropriate curiosity. These barriers to finding the right support are made worse by public ignorance, salacious media coverage, and stigma. Survivors hide their experience to avoid ridicule, which isolates them further. They end up suffering alone. It can be immensely healing for them to have their story validated by a compassionate journalist, while it reveals how under-resourced this field is. No reporter should have to act as a substitute for health and justice systems that have failed to protect victims. So this gap inspired me to launch Decult in 2023. Our inaugural sold-out conference in Christchurch last year created a safe, professionally held space for survivors, experts, and advocates, many of them from Australia, to connect and speak without fear and shame. Some were so empowered by it that they've since launched podcasts, peer support groups, and educational initiatives. This was followed by more professional development for social workers, health workers, and psychologists. To support these emerging networks and create further events, I've paused journalism and now work full-time pro bono for this cause. Decult is volunteer-run and relies on donations and grants. We strongly endorse the Beyond Belief report and have these recommendations. Don't conflate religion with cults. Many cults are not religious, but commercial enterprises. Make shunning and group-based coercive control a crime. Deregister charities that are cults. No more tax breaks for their front businesses. Train mental health professionals in cult recovery therapy. Protect consumers in the self-help industry through advocacy and legislation. Establish helplines and information centers to prevent recruitment and assist leavers. Germany, where I'm from, Austria, and France already have them. Some of them, like in Germany, for decades. Develop safe transitional housing, similar to women's refuges or rehab centers for people leaving cults. Run public awareness campaigns to make organizations safer and to counter the crippling stigma that cult survivors face. Support trauma-informed, survivor-centered journalism and media projects. And last but not least, provide sustainable funding for grassroots organizations already doing this work. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. I'll hand over to John now for a question. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anke, for your opening statement and sort of going through your journey with your work so far. I just wanted to focus on, obviously, you've looked a lot in the New Zealand jurisdiction at what gaps there are, what are some of the reasons why these different organisations exist in the New Zealand context, but you've also had that exposure and connection to Australia as well. So I wanted to know, where do you see the strongest parallels between New Zealand and Victoria and what opportunities exist for collaboration or shared learning between our jurisdictions?
I'm not comfortable to comment on jurisdictions or legal matters, but
I'm not necessarily asking about legal matters. I'm just more asking about the cultures you've seen between the two.
Exactly. So I see the biggest chance for collaboration, and it is already happening on the grassroots level, where people who've been mentioned here before, like Liz Gregory, the Gloria Leaver Support Trust, organizations like Safeguarding Children, Kid Power International, how they could collaborate with Australian organizations, social services, mental health, professional training, and especially where we can learn from each other. Because even though my research, apart from coming over to meet some of the former Centrepoint members, my personal experience was in Australia for sure, but my research didn't really cover Australia. But the parallels and the patterns are the same, and we need to learn from each other. And that's where I see where you could put your feelers out and understand what we're doing in the space here, while we are also looking at what you're doing in Australia. And we're building these networks on the ground already, and they need to happen at a higher level as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Rachel. Oh, sorry, Rachel, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I know that you're looking at doing training in 2026. Are you able to tell me what additional training you're looking at, whether you've identified any gaps in the first training, what's come out and what the feedback has been, so that we can capitalise on that and be more efficient as well?
Yes, just to clarify, we did not offer the trainings. That was the Olive Leaf Network in New Zealand. So, but it was in direct collaboration with the event that we created, which was the first Australasian CUT conference of its kind. And one of our keynote speakers, one was Janja Lalic, the other one was Dr. Gilly Jenkinson from the UK. And because she came over as a keynote speaker, the Olive Leaf Network then could organize a training here with her in New Zealand with a first cohort of 80-something mental health practitioners, and some of them were from Australia. And we're hoping that with the next keynote speaker who's coming over as an expert for next year's conference, the same would be happening with another person, so that we can get these international experts here. So these trainings are not run by Decult, but there is also a network here on the ground that's building. It's called Cult Informed Professionals Network. And again, all these things have come together from people who've found each other for these networks that we're endorsing and helping to build, and especially through people finding their voice and identifying this gap.
Thank you. Was there anything that you felt was missed in the first conference that you've gone, yes, this is what we need, or it's started to evolve and develop and you've started to identify more that got missed in the first conference?
Essentially, what you're doing here is also what we want to bring to the conference, to speak about coercive control laws and how that can be changed. Another thing that we see is where a lot of work needs to be done, and I'm not sure how you can get there with legislative measures, but maybe more on the therapy sector, is the reconciliation between first and second generations, or what the survivors from Children of God talked about before, these broken families where conversations still haven't happened years and years later, and again that stops, or decades later, and again that stops people from actually seeking justice, getting to therapy, finding the support they need, because they don't even have a family structure around them, because their former family was the cult. And yes, they're on the outside, and they're often, and I think this is important to understand, they're often still being silenced. many, many years later. So one thing I want to add, and maybe this helps to know. So when I researched Centrepoint, the historic sex cult in New Zealand, where the victims or the survivors that I've met, and some of them had never ever shared their story before with anyone. I was the first person who came along, and they were in their late 40s, one person especially. And the devastation or the barrier of them to even go and find a therapist, and the lack and the isolation they were suffering, and all these things that you've heard here before from others, they were so much more apparent from that, I would say, cohort of leavers than from those from Gloriabell, who I interviewed later on, who'd left in the last years, but who were sort of met on the outside by an organization like the Gloriabell Leaver Support Trust, and basically had these, even though it wasn't an official refugee center, but at least they have people helping them to transition. So that was really noticeable, what a difference that makes, while they're still battling with the same issues. But at least if there is help on the ground of people who actually understand what they need. And that became so apparent, so obvious to me, that we don't have these services here in New Zealand, and I don't think you have them in Australia either.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing? I think the main focus should be, have an anti-cult agency like other Western countries have them. And there's one in Berlin, there are lots of German cities, there's one in Vienna, you've been given the names of these people already. Look at what they're doing. This is incredibly important. These organizations and institutions, they already exist for people who've been, who suffered from sexual harm or trying to recover from addiction, and they find the right services when they need help. People who come from cults, they're still being met by survivor groups and activists who are often struggling themselves to even lead their lives. And this is the first thing that should be happening, to build towards a national or regional agency that can offer information, also where concerned family members can come and find help and support, where people can be helped who leave. So that's a real goal, and it's one that's not a pipe dream because it exists in other countries.
Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Christine.
Thank you so much for your contribution, and it's been really interesting to hear of the work that you're doing with Decult. So thank you for that. You've talked a little bit about the conference already, but I was just interested in what you see the key benefits of having the conference, and how is it actually organised and funded? Because I'm assuming if you had such a big conference like that, there'd be a lot of costs involved. So can you just briefly tell us how that all came about?
Right, I start from the back. How is it funded? How did it come about? Well, it's volunteer run. I do this work full time, unpaid, and we have a also unpaid business manager half time, and the rest is volunteers helping, and we're paying a few people for minor roles. But the bulk of the work is done for free, and we don't have proper sustainable funding yet. We're working on that, but it takes a long time. And do you know why? Because of the misconceptions that exist around cult leavers. So we have to do so much public education first, and it's happening, and we can feel that it's changing. But at first, the reactions are, a cult conference, ha, 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 is this where the leaders from cults meet? It's a joke for a lot of people. So you have to overcome these hurdles first to even get people in the room. Now, who is it for, and what are we achieving? So basically, two main target audiences. One is obviously people who've come out of cults and who are actually being seen and heard. And we had a lot of people who spoke for the very first time who had not been public before, and they were incredible. And I've seen, and you've had some in your hearings here today and on other days, I've seen them go from strength to strength. They have found their voice. This has been a life-changing event for some of them, extremely empowering. We didn't see that, we couldn't foresee that, but that's a beautiful roll-on effect from this conference. The second target audience, and I think, again, a really important roll-on effect, is that so many people with a professional interest in this, mainly therapists, but also some legal people and social workers, teachers. They came because they're interested in this topic and they just couldn't really find enough information about it. And so they got all this input, and there's been this groundswell of networking, of professionals getting together, of webinars and professional development that's been since happened in New Zealand for health workers, for doctors, for social workers. I gave an event as well. Others have done webinars. We have Maria and others coming over for trainings for professionals. So this is another outcome, I would say, of the conference. And for those more empowered survivors, just to add that we have the first in-person peer support groups, one here in Christchurch and one in Auckland, and more will come, which we've never had in New Zealand before. And this is a small country that had a massive cult problem for a long time.
And you talk about a state-run protection agency. How do you see that working, particularly in connection with existing services like family violence, mental health?
So did you just say the first thing was something in Sydney? I missed the first bit. A state-run agency in Sydney. Is that what you said?
No, a state-run protection agency.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. There are different models, but if I look at what they have in Austria and what they have in Germany, especially in Berlin, because there are also some that are under the umbrella of churches, but the ones that are completely secular and government funded and run, they are like information centers. There are different models, what part of the social services or the government they would belong to, but essentially they are there to stop recruitment, to put up public information, to run information campaigns, to advise people who come and need support as family members or as those who've come out of cults, and also then to help these people to find the right protection, the right support, basically do some of the work that now other smaller grassroots organizations are already doing as volunteers mainly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'd just like to ask about establishing formal survivor representation within any reform work or any projects that look at this area. The example I'll give you is in Victoria, we've done a lot of reform around family violence, and we have a Victims Survivors Advisory Council that was created in Victoria to give people with lived experience a voice and to ensure that they're consulted on the reform program and any policy decisions that the government takes. Do you know of any examples internationally where there is a survivor body like this that advises governments on people who are coming out of cults and high control networks, or do you have any advice around the value to this?
I think I'll take that question on notice because I don't know off the top of my head, but there might be some, so I'm happy to help with that.
Yeah, no worries, that would be great. And one other question I'd like to ask you, you've identified some data gaps around the prevalence and impacts of coercive high control groups. We've also heard a lot from other witnesses about the need for more data and research in this space. What kind of data or research do you see as most urgently needed?
Especially around kids and cults. As far as we know, as far as I know, Janja Lalich is an exception, and there isn't much on this otherwise. We don't have, at least here in New Zealand, we certainly don't have enough research into especially the current cults. So I think what we need to do, what needs to happen also is that the survivor, I don't want to say survivor-led research, but that those researchers from the past, you might be aware of the so-called cult wars of the 80s, that the sociologists who are now been exposed and identified as cult apologists and have often perpetuated some of the harm that's happened, especially to children in cults, that they're not the main voice or the only ones that people look to because they've once studied a cult many years ago. So there needs to be a shift away from the sort of old school fascination of like an anthropologist looking at a tribe somewhere in Africa, but actually looking at this through the lens of we're looking at mental health abuse and human rights abuses here, and to identify those stronger. So to get away from the practices and the belief systems, that's all been studied. The focus needs to be on human rights and mental health.
Okay, thank you. Well, Anke, thank you very much for appearing before the committee today and for your contribution to this inquiry. We greatly appreciate the time and effort that you've taken to prepare your evidence. You'll be provided with a proof version of today's transcript to check, together with the question taken on notice. Verified transcripts and responses to questions taken on notice will be then published on the committee's website. Once again, thank you very much. We're really grateful for your contribution and for all the work that you're doing in New Zealand. So thanks again. And I declare this hearing adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.